Right now, we are just about to start the panel Mineral Resources and Mining, Innovations, Technologies, and Transformation. And to moderate this panel, it is my pleasure to receive Ms. Catalina Leite. Where is Catalina? Catalina, are you hearing me? Catalina is a journalist. Hello, Catalina. Catalina is a journalist at O POVO newspaper, a Brazilian newspaper. Thank you very much for joining us today, Catalina, and also, of course, this amazing panel. We are just about to start. Please feel free to introduce your speakers and go ahead with the panel. Thank you very much. My dear, we are not hearing you. Can you please turn on your mic?
It's on.
Okay.
Do you hear me?
Yes, yes. Now we can hear you. Thank you. Please go ahead.
No, I was saying that I've been watching since the beginning, and I'm really glad to hear all these discussions about social and environmental development, and this plenary couldn't be different, especially when we're talking about the mining industry that's responsible for 10% of anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions and its consequences. So to talk about innovations, technologies, and transformation regarding the industry, we have Mr. Paulo Gomes, who is co-founder of the New African Capital Partners. We have Mr. Stephen Yeboah, CEO and co-founder of Commodity Monitor. Hope I said that right. Mr. Andrew Alli, CEO of SouthBridge Group, and Mr. Igor Lucena, Senior Economist at the Brazil-Africa Institute and former Brazilian-Japanese Cultural Foundation Chairman. Thank you very much, all of you gentlemen, for being here today at the lunchtime, and I hope we have a great conversation. So, as the COP26 happened recently, I would like to start asking you what policies and technologies the mining industry is adopting to guarantee its activity in a sustainable way. I guess we could start with Mr. Stephen and then make a round of conversation.
All right, thank you very much, Catalina. It's a pleasure to join the Brazil Africa Forum this year, and particularly a panel discussing this interesting topic. So basically, the world is fast moving towards green energy and transitioning towards sustainability. And the mineral sector of mining happens to be a key determinant or a key factor if the world will make a progress. And it happens that whatever kind of mining we are talking about, whether it's a large-scale mining or artisanal and small-scale mining, they all have to adapt to sustainability levels so that they can cut down or mitigate risk when it comes to its usage of water, forest, and then land resources. Basically, yes, we all need to set, these companies. Of course, the large mining companies have their own operating rules where they are fast moving towards that. But what mostly is neglected is the artisanal and small-scale mining sector. And in Africa, for example, artisanal and small-scale mining sector contributes hugely in terms of mineral extraction. So if there is any topic on sustainability or any issue regarding sustainability and green growth, we have to loop in the artisanal and small-scale mining sectors. And basically, they have to be at the forefront. It's basically that they need a new technology where they can mine. If it's gold, they can recover gold without using any chemical, and then without destroying water bodies, and then without destroying forest resources. I think this is basically what the topic should be, the discussion should focus on. Thank you.
And I've been reading about how green energy is a go-to way to really help this, like using hydrogen as energy, right? And I think it's really interesting because here in Ceará, in Fortaleza, Brazil, we are investing a lot in green hydrogen. So how are these conversations happening in the industry? How is this a reality in all companies, the most of them, or we are still working to amplify the access to this technology?
Yes, that's a very good point. Basically, in some countries in Northern Africa, talking about Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt, these countries have actually started some technology development when it comes to hydrogen. And then, I mean, some of these projects are already ongoing so that it can add up to their energy mix. So it's basically that, the continent is, it has this abundant mineral resources. Now, how do we turn these mineral resources into sustained development? And when you're talking about sustainability, let's not forget that it's not just a focus on the environment. It's about how they can use the mineral resources to improve the lives of people so that those living in close to mining operations will have better economic livelihoods, right? As much as they protect their environment. I think this is basically, but for hydrogen, yes, it's being developed, particularly in the northern part of Africa, and it's fast growing. There have been some investment, especially from actors in the EU that are investing in these hydrogen developments in northern Africa. So yes, it's a reality, it's happening.
And beside that, what other kinds of technologies, and not only technologies, but social technologies, do we have to think when we're talking about mining industry to be more sustainable? Because the impact in local communities and the impact, as you said, right, in the land, in the water, they are huge. So what are the responsibilities of the companies, private or public, to overcome these social issues? What they need to do? And I would like to ask you and the others too, like Andrew, Paulo, and Igor, to talk about this.
No, absolutely. It's a very important question. So basically, I'm working in Ghana, right? I work with Commodity Monitor. So Commodity Monitor, we are into trading, logistics, and research, along the various commodity we can talk about. So our recent engagement, we have been leading the deployment of mercury-free mineral processing technologies for artisanal and small-scale miners in Ghana. In Ghana, there are more than 1 million people that are into artisanal and small-scale mining. And these miners are contributing about 40% of Ghana's gold. So that is very huge. They are very critical to Ghana's survival in terms of its gold export. So what we are doing is that we realize for the past 2 decades, these guys have been accustomed to the use of mercury in recovering gold. So this mercury, gets contaminated into water bodies, right? It also, affects children. It affects women, especially pregnant women, in terms of development of, the organs of children. So what we realized was that the best thing to do, to contribute to social livelihood, to empower, women and to mitigate the risk of chemical contamination is to introduce an alternative way of recovering gold. And we introduced the mercury-free processing equipment, which we have several of them now in Ghana, which the miners are benefiting. So actually they now have a triple win. They are increasing their operations. The second is that they are recovering more gold, and now they are even shifted away from the use of chemical. So this is helping, reduce the risk of artisanal small-scale mining operations on the environment. And this is basically what, within the African context, or even the world, we can talk about that, the use of technology. When there is an advent of a new technology, it can help, reduce this risk. And this risk cuts across both the large scale and then the small scale. But I think mostly the focus has largely been on the large scale. So we can now focus more on the small scale. We are doing this in Ghana and then other West African countries, in Cote d'Ivoire, in Liberia and then Guinea. So this, I think, is laudable. Is basically to change their way of operation. Otherwise, the whole due diligence, sustainability within having to ensure green gold will never be realized.
And do you think those solutions are hard to implement, or they are the difficulty on implementing them are more related to political and economical bias? Because as you said, you implemented that and then you have a triple win. So that's amazing. So why aren't we doing that more? Why don't we see that more expensive if we have the technology, if we have the chance, and if it's so good? And I would like to ask you that, but pass this to Igor also. as economical as a master in economics to talk about that, and invite Andrew and Paulo to discuss that too, please.
All right, Catalina. Yeah, very, very good question. So we realized that when we started deploying this technology across Ghana, there were two key challenges. The first has to do with knowledge, right, on the use of technology or the existence of the technology. So the miners have known for over 50 years or more of their mining operations that mercury is the only way to recover gold. We showed this new technology and now they've started, but basically is that historically these guys have been, there have been this deep infatuation or deep attachment with mercury. So it takes knowledge, consistent training and education to get them used to. And then the second challenge is also about finance. And I know basically Andrew, Alli, and then my colleagues will understand that when it comes to risk, in the small-scale mining sector across Africa, most of the financial institutions and actors actually, they are so much risk averse when it comes to investing in these guys because small-scale miners are not that organized. So it's very difficult to get hold of them to finance the operations. So in Ghana, for example, the government through the Minerals Commission. So the Minerals Commission is basically the regulator of the mining sector. They are organizing the miners into groups and sections so that they can train them and give them the technology to improve their operation. So in a way, if you're able to sort out this issue of knowledge on the use of technology and also finance, because the new technology basically has, it demands some huge capital. So if the finance is there, whether it's through the banks or through, private investors or equity, funds, basically we will be able to deploy more technology. And this is, I think, the most important vehicle if you want to save the environment, protect our water bodies, the forest, and then the land resources.
If I can come in here.
Sorry.
Yeah, so a couple of points. I mean, just to take the last point from Stephen, I think that most financiers would find it difficult to deal with, hundreds or even thousands of artisanal miners. So there needs to be some intermediary. That intermediary could either be a large mining company, could be a government or something like that. I think that, it's not so much per se the risk of, something different, but it's just how you really organize it. That's the issue. To come to a sort of wider perspective on this, I think that the mining companies and if I extend mining to also include oil and gas extraction, they have come along a journey where 20, 30 years ago, they were very much, we pay our taxes, we pay our royalties, it's up to the government to sort out all the social and environmental issues, to realizing that they have to be embedded much more in the communities. And I think that this has also accelerated a little bit, particularly in Nigeria, where I live, where you have started to get a lot more indigenously owned oil companies working in the sector. So, they are not essentially foreign multinationals. I don't have anything against foreign multinationals, but, they're a lot closer to the local people. They understand them, and the local people understand these guys better. And so what you've seen is, for example, some of these companies coming up with some quite interesting structures where, for example, the local communities have some sort of share in the company or in the oil production. And therefore, interests are aligned. They can also help with the vigilance around the environmental issues. So again, it's really around having, different models and different ways of thinking to draw in the local communities to create win-win situations. Because in the past, people would come, they would extract this oil, there would be disadvantages, spills, machinery coming into your community, and yet you don't see any benefit from it. So, you're not very supportive. and then things start to happen. So by bringing the local communities in, by giving them a stake in it, and by listening much more carefully to what they want and what they have to say, rather than coming with a top-down, this is our idea of how you should develop. I think those have led to better outcomes, both for the oil producing companies, but also for the communities themselves.
Yeah, I think what we could say also is that to add to what Andrew was saying is that there are much more accountability now than in the past. And having that kind of intermediary player to deal with the small artisanal miners is definitely something that need to be encouraged in setting up programs. And those programs can also provide some financing in a much structured way to the small scale miners. But I want also to add the fact that sustainability here, it's about also how do you start creating conditions for more beneficiation, because that classical way of just attracting and exporting raw material is certainly not a good avenue for sustainability. And in that sense, I think it's difficult to do beneficiation with renewable energy and going to use solar for that. And that's why I think we have been, many of us, to warn people not to rush toward eliminating the role of gas, natural gas in the energy mix toward the transition. So this fundamentalism that sometimes we push, that Africa has to go into a shortcut in with the renewable energy, like solar, which is the one that people flag all the time, is not realistic. The other thing I think it's important to add to what Stefan was saying is information and knowledge. And I think now there is technology on using satellite observation to scan the environment where the mining is happening. So there is much more ability to get data on what's going on in terms of the impact on water, on agriculture. So technology is definitely something new, and that Andrew was saying the mining company are much more aware and much more accountable. So they will tend to plug those technological innovation into the operation. I want also on mining, I think for Africa, what is very important is for the next 10, 50, 20 years, for us to push for energy mineral that are useful for this transition. Everything that goes to build batteries, manufacture batteries in our continent. So those kind of mineral are those that the state actually can even get involved in promoting with more, I would say, bold incentives rather than the others that we know in the mining sector. So those are a couple of points that I wanted to add into what Stefan and Andrew raised earlier.
Yeah, thank you, Catalina, for the invitation and everyone here at this panel. I would like to summarize, I think, what Andrew, Paulo, and Stephen all said. It's very interesting, and they all communicate together with the same ideas. But I would like to make a larger prognosis of what we're seeing right now. As we saw in the COP26 in Glasgow, what we are watching right now is a geoeconomic power play where countries all around the world are in disputes and clashing themselves for new technologies and how they will impact their economies and how they will affect and change the relationship between countries. And it's important to say that mining, the extraction of mineral resources, is one of the most important aspects in this 21st century. There are two important things that countries are looking right now, where they can have mineral resources for new technologies, which is a very complicated and geopolitical clash or struggle, and how they can expand new markets including ideas of how we said regarding transnational companies, multinational companies, and how they work together. However, this competition between countries are not win-win. Sometimes there are countries that are looking for more incentives than others. We saw that with India, and we are still looking in Brazil the ideas how the mineral resources can be used to develop our countries. And what is interesting is that African countries and Brazil are fighting to their own space in this international clash. And of course, politics and economics are not separate from each other. What many people think, they're completely connected. And that's probably the most struggle situation. And when we look from macroeconomic perspective to microeconomic perspective, mining is still one of the most important sources of foreign direct investment. And African countries such Kenya or South Africa, Nigeria, and Brazil have one very most important thing in common. We do need foreign direct investment. We need to have an increase in our savings in order to develop ourselves. In economic history, countries without foreign direct investment, without a higher degree of savings, do not develop, do not change social realities. And therefore, when we see the percentage of foreign direct investment related to mining and in Brazil, a little bit in steel industry, that accounts for more than 20% in the last 10 to 20 years. And of course, that amount will be increasing, and it's supposed to increase also in the African countries. And we have some problems that we're seeing right now that, of course, will impact social development and responsible mining for all countries. First is inflation. We're seeing inflation rising in all countries, developing world and developed world. And therefore, as rising inflation increases cost of productions, that creates a problem for companies to develop more environmental, social, and governance, the ECG practice that are necessary for a better beneficiary for all parts involved. And one thing that Andrew spoke that is very interesting is that the responsibility of companies regarding social and regarding environmental has changed. However, that must be included in the business plan. There are costs for it, and companies now do not only respond to their shareholders, but also to all stakeholders involved in this situation. And what is important, I think, is the idea that clusters, geoeconomic partnerships, countries binding together, for example, the African Union that are being mobilized, and also partnerships regarding Mercosur and the European Union, these ideas, these developments of macroeconomic strategies that countries bind them together, they're fundamental. So the companies in mining, gas, oil, steel sectors can be more responsible and can work in partnership throughout not only their countries, but with other companies. And that's what I think it's the most complex situation right now, how the recovery, the post-COVID, how our high inflation, how central banks are increasing interest rates, all of these macroeconomic factors are very confusing for companies. And what we do realize and what we do need now is understanding how economy is gonna work in the next 2, 3, 4, and 5 years, so companies can rely themselves in more assertive ways to implement responsibility not only to shareholders but also to stakeholders.
When Paulo talked about not rushing the countries and all those things, that's really interesting. And also connecting with what Igor and Andrew talked to, is to think how not only the African countries and Brazil, but how the whole countries, the whole industry in the world can help and to increase to help other industries in African countries in Brazil to rise, and how to make them they understand that's a good thing for everybody. I think that's a point that we're starting to understand now, that we have to make decisions not only for our country but for the whole world, and it includes thinking about the economy of other countries that they have nothing to do with me, but they do. And as Igor said, that's complex, that's difficult. But what are the ways to introduce this thinking, this understanding in economical contracts and political partnerships too?
Well, if I can have a go at that. Firstly, there's no one answer. And I think, the answers are a range of things. The first one is just sort of advocacy and, making the case and making people understand the situation. The other thing I think is really, trying to align objectives. So, I think if you look at the whole issue around carbon, the problem that we have fundamentally with carbon is that there is no financial cost to people who are polluting the world with carbon, and whatever cost there will be is going to come in 30, 40, 50 years time. So there's no real, if you like, financial or economic incentive for people not to do this. What the whole COP arrangement is trying to do is to achieve a legal incentive by getting people to sign on to agreements to make some changes. And I think that in terms of the question you asked, Catalina, we also need to take the same approach, which is how can you create legal incentives by getting people to sign up to agreements, and then ultimately how can you create financial incentives by making it more expensive for people to not do the right things. And I think if we can figure that out and if we can come to some agreement on it, because I don't think it's something that one country or one company can impose on everybody else, then incentives will start to align in the right direction. But it's really about trying to look for multiple different ways of pushing those incentives so that they align in the right direction.
And Stephen, do we have some experiences in Africa that already are including this way of thinking of international partnership and understanding of the issue of the social issues in the most complex and macro way?
So we've had some attempts at this, but to be honest, they haven't always been very successful. So, for example, for the last 20 years, the Nigerian government has been trying to reduce the flaring, during oil production, and they've tried to introduce various oil flaring taxes, but for whatever reason, they haven't really had the courage to enforce them. And therefore, although flaring has been reduced through technology and through other types of incentives, it hasn't been reduced as quickly or as drastically as I think it would have been the case if they had really imposed these taxes on gas flaring. Or it's not really taxes, it's really charging these companies the cost of the damage that they're imposing by flaring these, these unwanted gases. And, if you make that more expensive, then they will also start to look for more economical ways of using those gases, which, it has happened, but not as aggressively as I think many people would like to see.
Stephen, would you like to say something?
Hi, Catalina. Yeah, I mean, basically, the whole discussion on, and what happens at COP is that, to be honest, the Africa as a continent is giving, for me, a very bitter pill to swallow always, right? So there's a continent contributing less carbon, as Andrew said, there are corporates when it comes to carbon, emissions. But at the end of it, they go cost-free, right? Because they didn't take responsibility in terms of financing, to finance the cost of their emissions. So at the end of it, what then portends for Africa as a continent? So for me, the whole argument has been that Africa has the resources, right? You talk about mineral resources, for example, bauxite, the manganese, the phosphate, the titanium, we have the gold, we have the cobalt and all that. At the end of it, looking at the diverse and huge needs of the continent, what the continent should think about is how to utilize, and as Paulo has said, how to build, very improved and good beneficiation so that the continent can benefit economically, socially, and also politically, whatever it seeks to, to go for. At the end of it, it also has to take into account that, yes, there are environmental costs, but the continent needs so much, to transition and to push and progress. So at the end of it, it's about utilizing the resources, making sure you mitigate the risk, the environmental risk, and then you seek for the improved livelihoods of your people, so that, if people are reneging on their responsibility at COP, what the continent should think about, the leaders should think about is how then do we utilize the resources we have to build the roads, right, to construct the hospitals, to build the schools, and then to, at least propel manufacturing, local manufacturing. I think this is basically what, the discourse should be. Otherwise, COP over and over, I followed the COP with my experience with the Africa Progress Panel that was chaired by Kofi Annan in Geneva. We followed the COP up to today. Most of it is basically that the responsibility to find out the cost of carbon emission is just not there. So the continent has to take its own decision, utilize the resources it has to develop and advance also.
And I once interviewed Mr. Marco Quesada from Conservation International about the Ocean Decade, and he said how much traditional knowledge Latin America, Africa, and Asia can provide to find solutions for some big social and environmental issues. So I would like to know what's your take, Mr. Igor, Stephen, and Andrew, too, on the potential of African countries, all of them, and Brazilian partnerships to find innovative solutions for the sustainable development of the mining industry. What are our people really producing on knowledge that we should be paying more attention to implement in the industry?
Well, that's a keyword, right? Innovation. But what innovation really means, when we regard innovation as the transformation of some idea or some model of production, which means more efficiency. How can we become more efficient, and how can we make that production more reliable to all the partners involved? There's some factors that I would like to speak about the Brazilian side, and also that can be used all around the world, but regarding also the African countries, which are the first, the increase of public-private partnerships. It is obvious that the idea is that public-private partnerships can create an environment that can increase output for the production of the mining sector. But what are the goals of these partnerships? It is the idea how a country and how an industry can increase value added, which means how countries can integrate themselves to a global value chain in the higher degrees of global value chain. Because when you are in the higher degrees, even though mining is still one part of a total value chain, when we can work on that and increase that productivity, you receive more resources. It increases the flow of FDI, and countries can create more technology on themselves. That, of course, is needed when we speak about less protectionism, which is one of the biggest problems right now. Countries are reliable and more clauses and closing themselves. For example, how we saw in Brexit, that is a very bad example, and that decreases innovation, that closes country up. Therefore, what I advocate here is that protectionism is a problem. The barriers are still a problem in the 21st century. And when we call in, we are talking about the situation, one basic needs of innovation is education. If we don't have a higher investment and solutions in education for our country, it is impossible for innovation to drive. It's impossible to go up in the scale of global value chains in the mining sector. And it's important that we understand that, for example, the World Economic Forum has related that the 10 most important 10 most countries that pay more for teachers are mostly the first world countries. But it's interesting that the fourth in that list is Mexico. So Mexico, which is a country in developing state, is in the same side as New Zealand, as Norway, and other developed countries. Therefore, there's an understanding that paying more and having a bigger payment for teachers, that will increase education, and of course that will also increase in the long term technology and innovation. So I would like to advocate here that education is the base for all technology, and the idea that countries should perceive higher standards in the global value chain is a most interesting way for African countries and Latin American countries. We saw that in Asia. We saw that in China during the last 30 years. We saw that in South Korea. We saw that in Hong Kong. And there are countries that, in the same way, they have created some protection for the development of their sectors, but they also increase technology and gradually open themselves. I do believe that this formula can still be used for African countries. And what Andrew said, it's very important. Accords between ideas and countries and companies should not and cannot be enforced themselves. They should be arranged between as many as countries as they can, so we can have a playing field of competition and also a playing field of costs that can be implied and enforced to all players in the market. That's the only way we can upgrade our skills, and we can see more interesting approaches in the mining sector.
Thank you, Igor. We're reaching our last 4 minutes now. So I'd like to ask you to give your final thoughts on the thematic of this plenary. And thank you all for coming and for your presence and your sharing your thoughts on it.
Thank you, Catalina. It's been my great pleasure to be on this panel. I think, mining in one form or another is an ancient industry. It's been around for thousands of years, but, it's still one where we can see innovations, both in terms of the technology. And I do slightly disagree with what Paulo said earlier, which is that, you are seeing renewable technologies, for example, being introduced into mining operations, although I do agree with his central point that, jumping away from using any kind of hydrocarbons prematurely could be dangerous. But I think what's more important than even hard technologies or hard advances are soft advances in terms of how you do things, the processes, how you include people, etc. Because that is really how you get you allow the benefits of mining to spread to the widest possible audience while also minimizing the downsides. And I think it's very important to continue to focus very much on the softer, the people type of issues, as much as the hard technology issues, because they're so important.
Stephen, would you like to say something to end our conversation?
Yes, Catalina, thanks very much. I think it's been an interesting discussion. Basically, my position is that the continent, is replete with a lot of resources, mineral resources, and technology is changing the way, we used to mine. For example, these mineral resources. Either we are improving production and keeping people home because there are a lot of machines working, or the technology is allowing you to do a lot of value addition. So I think this is basically that Africans should latch onto the positives. It's basically that the mineral resources has to work for its economy, right? The fourth industrial revolution is happening. And then basically those industrial minerals, right? The lithium, the cobalt are critical. These are found in a continent. So Africa should add value and then make sure that it's able to benefit from the value chain and not just exporting in raw form. I think this is how, the continent can basically progress, and technology is key that we have to, factor it in. Thank you.
Igor, you can say something.
Yes, I would like to thank you very much, Catalina, and also thank Paulo, Stephen, and Andrew for the sharing of thoughts. That was very inspiring. And I would like to finish this panel with some basic words that I think they're very important, no matter how they can work for mining, which is the shift from fossil to electric and other sources. I do agree that cannot be made in a hush, but it will happen in more pace-by-pace basis, step-by-step. I do think that automation, digitalization, pollution prevention, prevention of soil erosion and water recycling are the most important aspects of mining these days, no matter how we can arrange that. And of course, for the social, the rehabilitation of workers and people affected, not only in African countries, but in Brazil and Latin America, are concerns of all stakeholders in the sector. They were in the past, they are now, and they will be for the next century.
Thank you very much. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here, for your kind presence.